I have a sort of feeling that if we'd got some troops into Yugoslavia, that we might have produced a coalition arrangement which would have spared the Yugoslav people in 40 years or more of a communist dictatorship.
Apart from Trieste, Tito also had his sights on Carinthia, the southern province of Austria, bordering Yugoslavia. Here, remnants of the German armies had converged, preferring to surrender to the Allies than to the Russians, confident that they would be better treated. Carinthia was also where Mihailovic's Chetniks had fled, at least those who had escaped the clutches of the Red Army and of the Partisans en route. But unlike at Trieste, the Allies made no attempt at a show of force. Instead, Tito was bought off by the willingness of some Allied forces to hand over to him Chetniks loyal to Mihailovic.
Very great mistakes were made in the sense of repatriating by force the Yugoslav forces that had taken refuge in Austria. The Chetnik forces were on the whole patriotic Yugoslavs who were simply anti-communist. But in the heat of war, these things do happen.
As they were herded along the road to the railway station, the hapless Chetniks thought they were being sent to a new life in Italy. Indeed, they'd been told so by their British guards. It was only when their train was firmly locked with them inside it that some began to have doubts. Just outside the station was a junction, one line to Italy, the other to Yugoslavia. The points changed, and their die was cast. The train entered a tunnel, the other side of which was Yugoslavia. Onlookers recall the deafening hammering on the inside of the coaches as what lay in store dawned on the Chetniks and their families. It is not an episode that ranks high in the annals of British justice and fair play. The train went deeper and deeper into Yugoslavia until it reached the remote mountainous forest of Kočeva, where their partisan executioners awaited them. Made to strip, their hands wired together, they were rushed along this path. Ever further into the forest, hearing ahead of them the terrible screams of those who had already followed that luckless route, until they mounted the brow of a little hill. Beyond was a deep pit into which they were forced, and then dynamite hurled in. It was a routine that was to be repeated at least a score of times until all 20,000 or so remaining Chetniks had been accounted for. Only recently have the grisly pits been discovered. Milovan Djilas, who was Tito's closest associate until he broke with him, admits in his memoirs that an atmosphere of revenge prevailed. The partisans, he says, killed far too many people. Eventually, Tito called a halt because, as he put it, no one fears death anymore. Recent estimates of the total killings then put them as high as 300,000.
It's hard to describe how bad the terror in Yugoslavia was in 1945, 1946. People were being arrested, people were being killed.
It has been described as the Red Spring or the Bloody Spring. Probably a better description of it would be the Bloody 2 years.
Some people were shot for no obvious reason. They were, of course, accused of collaboration, but they were simply people whom the communists didn't like. The purpose for this liquidations, to use this word that was used then again, was in order to instill fear in anybody who had any thought of resisting the communist domination.
They had so-called list with black spots about 8,000 of them, which were people who were marked for elimination, people who were marked to be punished for not offering sufficient support to the partisans during the war.
In the end, it no longer mattered what you did during the war. I thought for a while that my being with the resistance, that even being in Tito's army would protect me, but on the contrary, that was sometimes considered as an aggravating circumstance because you were alleged to have betrayed.
Tome je igrala ulogu ideološki moment kod komunista da definitivno se obračunaju sa neprijateljem radi učvršćenja svoje vlasti. To je ona druga, rekao bih, loša strana ili preterane mere koje su inspirisale komuniste za tako, kako ste vi rekli, krvavi obračun.
I once calculated on the basis of figures which we had in Slovenia that there must have been about 200,000 people in prison at the same time.
Tito was absolutely sure that he has to crush down the Serbian national movement in order for his revolution to be successful. That's why the terror over the Chetniks at the end of the war and first years after the war was so tremendous. He had to behead the anti-communist Serbian resistance, which still existed armed in certain parts of Serbia. Some of them survived until 1949 and were still fighting the communists. Some of them were forced to leave the country and to escape in all kinds of ways. Some of them were imprisoned for 20, 25, 18, 15 years. It depends. But the movement had to be crushed, and moreover, it had to be showed as a traitor movement. It had to be blamed. It had to be. Tito had to develop a blasphemy over Chetnik movement. It wasn't a winner of the war who defeats his enemy. It was a blasphemy, making them anti-angels, making them devils of the Serbian people.
The key devil for Tito, Mihailovic, was finally captured in March 1946 after a countrywide search involving virtually the entire Yugoslav army. He was brought to trial 4 months later with all the panoply Tito could muster. A special courtroom was created to which the world's media was invited with no expense spared to get them there. To help smear the alleged guilt, Mihailovic was tried alongside other obvious German collaborators. Nor did it all go well for him when his prosecutor, Miloš Minić, who later became Tito's foreign minister, declared that the purpose of the judiciary was not to resolve disputes, but to liquidate the class enemy. Churchill, clearly embarrassed, had tried to persuade Attlee, who had replaced him as prime minister, to intervene. Attlee refused.
We had statements from roughly, let's say, 200, saying that we are willing to fly to Yugoslavia at our own expense to appear at his trial. Because of the charges against him of war collaboration, we believe our eyewitness testimony is relative to these charges, and any trial that does not have our testimony does not give him a fair trial. The State Department conveyed our message in a formal diplomatic note to the court in Belgrade. It came back saying, the guilt of Mihailovic is already decided. There's no purpose in these Americans coming over to testify.
Vrhovni sud Federativne Narodne Republike Jugoslavije vojno veće osuđuje Mihailovića Dragoljuba.
Mihailovic met twice with Tito. He had him in his hands. He could have killed him easily, but he respected international law and rules. When Tito grabbed Mihailovic, he was hardly waiting after 3 weeks to kill him.
Within 48 hours of sentence being passed and without any suggestion of an appeal, Mihailovic was executed. I wanted much, I started much, he said, but the whirlwind of history swept me away.
I think it was something that was bound to happen. It was part of the gale of the world, in his own words, that blew him away.
Having